When the lawyer read the will, my name wasn't there. Not once. Not even in passing. I remember sitting in that mahogany-paneled office, the smell of paper and old furniture heavy in the air. My palms were sweating against my skirt, but I kept my back straight, the way Mama Ellen, my mother-in-law, had taught me years ago. "Grace," she used to say, tapping my shoulder at the dinner table, "a lady never slouches, even when she's hurting." That day, I didn't slouch. But inside, I was collapsing. The lawyer's voice was flat and polite as he listed the names: Daniel, Ruth, and Michael. Their children. Their real children. Not me. Not the girl they'd raised since she was 17, the girl who called them mom and dad for 2 decades. When it ended, Ruth was the first to speak. "Well, I guess that's that," she said softly, gathering her papers like it was the end of a meeting, not the end of my world. Daniel avoided my eyes. Michael offered me a tight smile that didn't reach his face. I waited for someone to say something, anything. A mistake, perhaps? A missing page? But silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harper, but according to this document, your name isn't included in any bequest." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "But I was their daughter." He looked at me with professional sympathy, the kind that doesn't feel real. "I understand. But the will is quite clear." I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood up, nodded like a polite stranger, and walked out. Outside, the sun was too bright for grief. I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and whispered to no one, "How could they do this to me?" Before that day, I thought I knew what family meant. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 16, a rainy night, a truck that didn't stop in time, and a life that ended too soon. I was still in high school, alone, terrified, and suddenly without anyone to call home. My parents had been close friends with the Harpers, my future in-laws. Their son, Thomas, had been my childhood friend. He was 2 years older, gentle, and protective. After the funeral, it was Thomas who held my hand, and it was his mother, Ellen Harper, who said, "You're family now, Grace. You'll stay with us." And I did. At 17, I moved into their home, a wide, cream-colored house on Willow Lane that always smelled like cinnamon and polished wood. Ellen ran it like clockwork: dinner at 6, church on Sundays, flowers fresh on the table. Her husband, Richard, was quieter, a man of few words, but kind eyes. They gave me a room, a place at the table, and something far rarer, belonging. I finished high school, went to community college, and started working part-time at a small bookstore downtown. When I turned 20, Thomas asked me to marry him. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. We were already a family, now it just became official. For years, I lived what I thought was a blessed life. Ellen would call me my daughter at every family gathering. She'd brush my hair back affectionately, her rings glinting in the light, saying, "Your mother would have been so proud of you." And I believed her. I believed every word. But beneath the warmth, there were cracks I didn't see. Small, almost invisible things. Like how Ruth, Thomas's younger sister, always introduced me as Thomas's wife, never our sister-in-law. Or how Daniel, the eldest, would say, "You're lucky mom took you in," with that half-smile that never felt kind. I brushed it off. Family has its flaws, I told myself. Every home does. When Thomas died, another car accident, 10 years after my parents, Ellen and Richard were the ones who carried me through it. They let me stay in the guest room after the funeral, even though part of me thought I should move out. Ellen insisted I stay. "You're not alone, Grace," she said, holding my hand at the kitchen table. "You'll always have a home here." And she meant it. Or at least, I thought she did. I took care of them in their old age, doctor's appointments, grocery runs, medicine reminders. I cooked, cleaned, kept the house running when Ellen's arthritis got worse. On quiet nights, Richard would nod at me from his recliner and say, "You've been a good girl, Grace." You've made this house feel alive again. Those words kept me going. I never imagined they could love me any less than their own children. Until the day the will was read. It started subtly, the way betrayal often does, too gentle to notice until it's too late. After Richard passed away, Ellen changed. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She still smiled when I brought her tea, but sometimes, when I'd walk into the room, she'd stop talking. Especially when Ruth was visiting. Once, I overheard them in the kitchen, Ellen's voice low, strained. "Don't start this again, Ruth," she said. "I just don't think it's fair, Mom," Ruth replied sharply. "You've done enough for her." "She's not." When I entered, they both went silent. Ellen smiled too brightly and said, "We were just talking about the church fundraiser, dear." I didn't question it then. I wanted to believe in the family we had. But deep down, something inside me shifted, a quiet unease I couldn't name. That night, while cleaning up after dinner, I found a torn envelope on the counter. It was addressed to Mrs. Ellen Harper, from a law firm I didn't recognize. The seal was broken. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Inside was a note, "Per your request, the new draft of the will has been prepared. Please review before final signing." I froze. A new draft? I placed it back carefully, pretending I hadn't seen it. But my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Why a new will? Why now? Was it about me? I told myself it was probably routine, older people update wills all the time. Still, that night, I couldn't sleep. Because for the first time in years, I wondered. Was I really family? Or just a guest who'd stayed too long? The next few weeks, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I told myself I was imagining things, that Ellen's strange silence, Ruth's sharp glances, the envelope from the law firm, all of it was just grief making me paranoid. But grief has a way of clearing fog, not creating it. And the clearer things became, the colder the truth felt. One afternoon, I was dusting the bookshelf in the study, Ellen's favorite room. She'd kept every family photo there, Thomas as a boy, Daniel's graduation, Ruth's wedding, and even a few of us together. I noticed something odd, one of the frames was gone. It had been a picture of me and Thomas, taken on our wedding day, both of us laughing in front of the Harper house. It used to sit beside a photo of Ellen and Richard. I asked her later, as gently as I could, "Mom, where's that photo of me and Thomas? The one from the wedding?" Her hand hesitated over her teacup. "Oh, I put it away," she said after a beat. The frame cracked. I smiled faintly. "I can replace it if you'd like." No. It's fine." But when I offered to fix it later that evening, she snapped, just a flicker of irritation, but enough to startle me. "I said I put it away, Grace. Leave it be." Her tone softened right after. She sighed, pressed her fingers to her temples, and said, "I'm sorry, dear. I just get so tired these days." I told her it was all right. But inside, something was breaking, quietly, invisibly. The photo wasn't the only thing that disappeared. A week later, I realized my name wasn't on the emergency contact list at her doctor's office anymore. Ruth's name had been moved to the top. When I asked about it, Ellen smiled faintly. "Oh, the clinic needed an update. Ruth lives closer now, you know. Just easier that way." I nodded. But the truth was, Ruth didn't live closer, she lived 2 towns away. I was the one who took Ellen to every appointment. I should have confronted her, but instead, I cleaned the kitchen, did the laundry, made her soup, because that's what you do when you love someone who raised you. You keep earning the love you think you already have. Ellen passed away quietly one Sunday morning in early spring. The house smelled of lavender and warm toast, and the sunlight was filtering through the lace curtains. I'd just brought her breakfast when I realized she wasn't breathing. The doctor said she went peacefully. I wanted to believe him. The funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. Ruth cried the loudest, holding on to Daniel's arm, while I stood by the coffin, numb. I wasn't sure what hurt more, losing Ellen or realizing how little space I was allowed to grieve. When the lawyer called 2 weeks later, I thought it was about paperwork, estate details, maybe a house transfer. I'd been living there for over a decade, taking care of everything. It made sense that Ellen would leave some instructions. I walked into that office expecting routine formality. Instead, I found betrayal written in black ink. The will, dated just a month before her death, listed everything: the house, the savings, even the jewelry Ellen wore every Sunday. And all of it went to her biological children, Daniel, Ruth, and Michael. There was a single line about me. To Grace Harper, with gratitude for her years of service and companionship, I leave my sewing machine and personal Bible. That was it. I stared at the page until the words blurred. Service. Companionship. Not family. Daniel's wife, sitting across from me, whispered something to him. I couldn't make out what. But Ruth didn't whisper. She probably shouldn't have been expecting much, Ruth said, voice clipped. Mom always said the will was just to make things fair. Fair? I repeated quietly. She shrugged. You had a roof over your head for years, Grace. Mom gave you that. You should be grateful. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Grateful. For love that had always been conditional. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. If you'd like to contest. No, Ruth interrupted. There's nothing to contest. But I wasn't listening anymore. All I could hear was the echo of Ellen's voice from years ago. Your family now. A lie wrapped in kindness. That night, I went back to the Harper house, my home, or what I thought was mine. I walked through every room slowly, touching the furniture, the framed photos, the curtains I'd sewn myself. When I reached the study, I saw a stack of boxes labeled for donation. My books were inside. My things. They'd started packing before I even left the lawyer's office. On the desk, I noticed an open envelope, the same law firm's letterhead. It was a copy of the final will, with a sticky note on top in Ruth's handwriting. House to be sold ASAP. My throat tightened. This wasn't grief anymore, this was eviction. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car outside the house until dawn, replaying every memory in my head, every I love you, every your family, every time I'd stayed up nursing Ellen through her pain. I thought about leaving quietly. Maybe that would be dignified. But something inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, refused. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was truth, whispering softly. You deserve answers. The next morning, I called the lawyer back. There's something wrong with that will, I said. He hesitated. I'm not sure what you mean, Miss Harper. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Ellen wouldn't leave me out like that. I took care of her for years. There has to be another version. Silence stretched on the other end. Finally, he said, I can't discuss private client matters, but I will say this, Mrs. Harper's will had multiple drafts. The most recent one was the only one submitted for probate. Who submitted it? He paused again. Her daughter, Ruth. And just like that, the pieces fell into place. Ruth had been visiting more often before Ellen died. She'd handled most of the paperwork, told me to rest while she took care of things. I thought she was being kind. She was rewriting my life out of the story. I hung up, my hands shaking. The house I loved, the family I devoted my youth to, it was all slipping away, buried under forged signatures and polite betrayals. But I wasn't the scared, grateful girl they'd raised anymore. I was a woman who had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's the most powerful kind of woman there is. When you lose everything you thought was yours, you start to see the world differently. Colors dull. Voices fade. But somewhere deep inside, a spark begins to burn, the one that whispers, no, this isn't over. That spark kept me standing when grief might have pulled me under. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase and drove back to the Harper house one last time. The door was unlocked, Ruth's car was in the driveway. Inside, I could hear voices from the kitchen. She won't fight it, Ruth was saying. Grace isn't that type. She's too grateful. I stepped inside before I could change my mind. You're right, I said quietly. I'm not the fighting type. But even gratitude has limits. Ruth spun around, startled. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed a stone. Grace, he started, we didn't expect. No, you didn't, I said. You didn't expect I'd find out about the drafts. About how Mom made a will before you changed it. Ruth's expression hardened. That's ridiculous. Everything was done legally. Maybe it was, I said, walking toward the kitchen table. But legality isn't the same as decency. Her jaw tightened. You're making this ugly, Grace. It already was ugly, I said softly. You just covered it with polite smiles. Daniel stood up. This isn't helping anyone. Mom wanted things to be simple. She didn't want the house torn apart by fighting. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who used to tease me about burning pancakes, who'd called me sis once, long ago. Then maybe you should have honored her by telling the truth, I said. Ruth scoffed. You think Mom would have left everything to you? You're not blood, Grace. You were a charity case she took in out of pity. That word, pity, sliced through me like a blade. I should have cried. I should have screamed. But I didn't. I simply said, no. She took me in out of love. But you wouldn't understand that kind of thing. Then I left. Because some fights don't need to be loud to be won. For days, I wandered through a fog of anger and sadness. But beneath it all was determination. I wanted proof, not for the money, but for the truth. I called the lawyer again, asking if Ellen had ever left any personal notes or letters attached to earlier wills. He hesitated, then said quietly, there was an earlier draft she kept in her home safe, the combination was never given to us. Only her children had access. The safe. I remembered it, a small metal box in the study, tucked behind books on the bottom shelf. Ellen used to keep old letters, family photos, and important papers there. She once joked, if I ever go missing, that box will tell you who did it. That night, I returned to the house. It wasn't breaking in, not really, I still had my key. The place felt hollow now, like it had already said goodbye to me. In the study, I found the safe exactly where I remembered it. The keypad blinked faintly in the dark. I tried the obvious combinations, birthdays, anniversaries, even the date of Thomas's death. Nothing worked. Then I thought of something small, something only Ellen and I shared, her favorite hymn, Amazing Grace. It had been our song. Every Sunday morning, she'd hum it while cooking. I tried 0624, June 24th, the day she'd adopted me into her family. A soft click. The safe opened. Inside were old letters, a pearl necklace, a small jewelry box, and a thick envelope labeled will, draft. My breath caught. I opened it carefully, hands trembling. The draft was dated 8 months before the final version. And in that document, my name was everywhere. Ellen had left me half the estate, the house, her personal savings, and even the family Bible she'd given me in the final version. There was a handwritten note on the bottom corner in Ellen's familiar looping script. Grace is as much my daughter as the others. Make sure she's taken care of. Tears filled my eyes. For a moment, I could almost hear her voice, calm, loving, certain. Then I noticed something else. At the top corner of the document, in small neat print, were the initials R.H. Ruth Harper. The witness signature on the final version. The same daughter who had pushed Ellen to simplify things. I sat there in silence, the paper trembling in my hands, realizing what she had done, and how far she'd gone to erase me. I wanted to march straight to Ruth and throw the will in her face. But something stopped me. Ellen had always said, Grace, the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs light. So instead, I made copies of everything. I photographed the draft, every page, every signature. Then I called the lawyer again. "I think you should see something," I said. 2 days later, we met in his office. He read the document carefully, his brows furrowing deeper with each page. This changes everything," he murmured. "If we can prove the final will was altered under undue influence, the court may revert to this earlier version." "Undue influence?" I asked quietly. "It means someone manipulated or pressured the testator, Ellen, to change her will against her true intentions." He looked at me with something close to respect. "Do you want to pursue it?" I thought of Ellen. Of her hands shaking when she signed papers near the end. Of Ruth's insistence that I rest while she handled everything. "Yes," I said softly. "Not for the money. For her." That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the dark sky. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Not happy, not yet. But grounded. I was no longer chasing their approval. I was defending my truth. The next weeks were a blur of meetings, statements, and quiet determination. Ruth, of course, fought it. She accused me of forging the draft, of manipulating Ellen in her old age. But the lawyer found handwriting analysis that proved Ellen's signature was genuine, and a caretaker's testimony that Ruth had handled all of Ellen's legal papers during her last months. The tide began to turn. When Ruth was called to respond formally, her composure cracked. She snapped during questioning, saying things like, "Mom didn't know what she was doing at the end," and "Grace was just the help." The court went silent. Even Daniel couldn't look at her. I didn't feel triumph. Just sadness, the kind that comes from seeing how far love can rot when it's mixed with greed. Still, Ellen's truth had finally been heard. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep them from trembling. Across from me sat Ruth, pristine in her cream blazer, her face tight with controlled fury. Daniel was beside her, shoulders slumped, looking more exhausted than angry. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken things, resentment, guilt, love that had turned sour. The judge, a silver-haired woman with steady eyes, began reading her notes. Her voice carried through the room, firm but not unkind. "In the matter of Harper Estate versus Harper et al., this court has reviewed evidence suggesting potential undue influence and alteration of testamentary intent." I didn't understand all the legal terms, but I understood her tone. Something was about to change. The lawyer presented Ellen's earlier will, the one I'd found in the safe. He showed her handwriting analysis, caretaker statements, and text messages between Ruth and the notary. Ruth's voice trembled when she was called to the stand. "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. Mom was confused. "She told me she didn't want Grace to have the house anymore. She said Grace didn't need it." The judge's gaze was calm but piercing. "Do you have that in writing, Miss Harper?" "No, but..." "Then what we do have," the judge interrupted gently, "is your mother's signed document stating otherwise." Silence fell. I stared at Ruth, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. She wasn't evil, just afraid. Afraid of sharing, afraid of losing control. Maybe, deep down, she believed love was something you could divide like money. But love doesn't divide. It multiplies, or it disappears. After the final statements, the judge announced she'd take the matter under advisement. We were told to return in 2 weeks for the decision. 2 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. During that time, I moved into a small apartment above the bookstore where I used to work. It wasn't much, 1 bedroom, a creaky ceiling fan, and a window that looked out over Main Street, but it was mine. I spent my days reading, cleaning, waiting. Every night, I'd make tea and sit by the window, thinking of Ellen. I remembered her laugh, her soft humming of Amazing Grace, the way she'd tuck stray hair behind my ear. And I tried to forgive her too, for not seeing what her children were capable of. Because love makes us blind. And sometimes, that blindness passes down through generations. When the ruling day came, I dressed simply, navy dress, hair tied back, no makeup. I didn't want to look like someone fighting for money. I wanted to look like someone defending memory. The courtroom was quiet. Ruth looked pale. Daniel gave me a faint nod, a peace offering, maybe. The judge began. After reviewing all submitted evidence, this court finds that the will dated February 3 was executed under circumstances suggesting undue influence. Ruth's lips parted slightly. The judge continued, therefore, the court will honor the earlier will dated June 10, which clearly expresses Mrs. Ellen Harper's intent to include Grace Harper as an equal beneficiary. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just closed my eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. Not relief. Not victory. Just peace. The judge looked at me. Ms. Harper, your mother-in-law's words showed deep affection and trust. I hope this brings you closure. It does, Your Honor, I said softly. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, local news, curious neighbors, people who had known the Harpers all their lives. One of them asked, Grace, do you have anything to say to the family? I thought for a long moment, then said. Love doesn't need to be proven with money. But truth deserves to be protected, no matter who tries to bury it. Ruth brushed past me, refusing to meet my eyes. Daniel lingered behind. He hesitated, then said quietly, Grace. I didn't know what she'd done. I'm sorry. I nodded. I believe you. Are you going to sell the house? He asked. I looked back at the courthouse steps, sunlight catching on the marble. No, I said. I think I'll fix it first. It's been broken for a while. He nodded slowly. Mom would have liked that. Maybe she would, I said, smiling faintly. Maybe she already does. The next few months passed like the soft ending of a long storm. I spent my days restoring the Harper house, not for revenge, but for remembrance. Fresh paint, repaired steps, the garden replanted. Sometimes neighbors would stop by to talk, their voices filled with gentle curiosity. After everything, you're still staying here? One of them asked. Yes, I said. Because this house isn't about who owned it. It's about who loved it. Inside, I created a small study of my own, a quiet corner with Ellen's sewing machine, her Bible, and the framed wedding photo Ruth once hid away. It felt whole again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I played Amazing Grace softly on the old record player. The house glowed in the golden light. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. I wasn't the orphan they pitied. I wasn't the charity case. I was Grace Harper, loved, tested, and standing tall in the home she helped build. The house was quiet again, but not empty. The laughter that once echoed through its halls was gone, replaced by something gentler. A stillness that didn't ache anymore. On most mornings, sunlight would spill through the lace curtains, warming the wooden floors. I'd make coffee, open the windows, and let the scent of blooming lilacs drift in. Sometimes, I'd catch myself talking to Ellen out loud. Not out of grief, but gratitude. See, Ellen? I'd say softly, dusting her photo frame. We made it right. And maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was something else, but I always felt she heard me. It was nearly spring when Ruth came back. I was pruning the rose bushes when her car pulled into the driveway. For a moment, I froze. My first instinct was to retreat, to guard what was finally peaceful. But something in her posture stopped me, shoulders lowered, head bowed, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't the woman from the courtroom anymore. Hi, Ruth, I said quietly. You look tired. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that breaks in the middle. I am, she admitted. I just wanted to see the house. Mom's house. I nodded and stepped aside. You can. She walked through the doorway slowly, like she was afraid the house might reject her. Her eyes traveled across the living room, the new curtains, the photos back on the wall, Ellen's favorite chair restored. "It looks like her again," she whispered. "That was the point," I said. For a long moment, she just stood there, breathing it all in. Then she turned to me, eyes glassy. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I was wrong. I was jealous, angry. I thought Mom loved you more." I looked at her, really looked. Beneath the bitterness, there was something small and human. A frightened child who had lost her mother and didn't know how to grieve. "Ellen didn't love either of us more," I said softly. "She just loved differently. But she deserved to be remembered right." Ruth nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Grace." I smiled faintly. "I know. Maybe that's enough for today." She reached out as if to hug me, then hesitated. I closed the gap between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. Weeks passed, and life slowly folded back into rhythm. Daniel moved to another city with his son, and we exchanged polite, kind messages on birthdays. Ruth began volunteering at the local church, maybe to atone, maybe to start over. And me? I kept the Harper house alive. Every Sunday, I'd host a small reading circle for children from the neighborhood. We'd sit in Ellen's old sunroom, surrounded by stacks of books and the smell of lemon cookies. Sometimes, I'd tell them stories, not from fairy tales, but from real life. Stories about forgiveness, truth, and how even broken hearts can rebuild something beautiful. One of the girls asked once, "Miss Grace, was this house always yours?" I smiled. "It wasn't, but it was always meant to be mine. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family isn't about blood or last names. It's about who shows up when the storm hits. It's about the people who choose to love you when it's inconvenient, who see your worth when others don't." Ellen saw mine, even when I didn't see it myself. But love, I've realized, isn't just about giving. It's about protecting. Protecting truth, protecting memory, protecting the people who gave us a home when no one else would. I thought I lost everything when I lost them. But maybe I just had to lose the wrong kind of love to find the right kind. The kind that stays. The kind that rebuilds. The kind that forgives, without forgetting. One evening, I sat on the porch steps, the same place Ellen and I used to drink sweet tea during summer. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of rose and gold. I closed my eyes and listened, to the crickets, to the soft rustle of wind through the trees, to the house breathing peacefully again. And for the first time, I whispered something I hadn't dared to before. "I forgive you, Ruth. I forgive all of it." Because forgiveness doesn't excuse what happened. It just releases you from carrying it forever. Later, when I went inside, I noticed a small envelope resting on Ellen's old sewing table. It wasn't there before, maybe Ruth had left it earlier. Inside was a letter. "Grace. Thank you for restoring what I broke. Mom would have been proud of you, not for winning, but for staying kind. Love. Ruth." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer, and smiled through quiet tears. The war was over. And somehow, we'd all survived it. That night, I turned off the lights, leaving only one lamp glowing in the hallway. Ellen's photo hung above it, her smile soft and knowing. I whispered. "We're home now, Ellen. We're really home." And in that gentle, sacred stillness, I finally felt it. The peace I'd been chasing all my life.